Only by forgetting this primitive world of metaphor can one live with any repose, security, and consistency. This is the funny kind of thing, because this is definitely more like the Birth of Tragedy era writing, where he's so much. This is before he really got into just how difficult he wanted to make it to be understood sort of literally, because he and yet this is the seeds of that. Only by forgetting this primitive world of metaphor can one live with any repose, security, and consistency. Okay, most people want repose, security, and consistency, or at least think theirs are supposed to be positive. So it's like he's saying, hey, you got to forget the world of metaphor. And then this is what really, in a different word, someone like Kashify is saying. Forget all this world of your body. You're not your body. Forget those limits. And it's to get repose, security, and consistency. I mean, kind of according to this statement of Nietzsche. But anyway, okay, that's the beginning of the sentence. Only by means of the petrification and coagulation of a mass of images, which originally streamed from the primal faculty of human imagination like a fiery liquid, only in the invincible faith that this sun, this window, this table is a truth in itself. In short, only by forgetting that he himself is an artistically creating subject does man live with any repose, security, and consistency. Okay, so this is the sense that we live in a dream, because we get the senses, and through these steps of metaphor, we create a model in our mind, which is meant to be perhaps literal, but still a metaphor for the real world. But we forget that we've done this act of creation, and so we misapprehend what we're really dealing with. If but for an instant he could escape from the prison walls of this faith, his, quote, self-consciousness would be immediately destroyed. This is a little bit of hyperbolic, huh? It is even a difficult thing for him to admit to himself that the insect or the bird perceives an entirely different world from the one that man does, and that the question of which, and he's not just talking that we perceive it differently because of our different mentality and the way we take it. He's talking about perceiving a different world, taking a different cross-section. And that the question of which of these perceptions of the world is the more correct one is quite meaningless, meaning between them and us. For this would have to have been decided previously in accordance with the criteria of the correct perception, which means in accordance with the criterion which is not available. And I emphasize this constantly. Absolute knowledge would be a great thing. Too bad it's not available, and that is important when you have something you could conclude given a resource that you don't have. It's kind of like, would immortality be great? Therefore, the fountain of youth is a great thing, except for we lack ever finding that. So is it great when it doesn't exist? Okay, but in a way, but in any case, it seems to me that the correct perception, which would mean the adequate expression of an object in the subject, the adequate expression of an object in the subject, so meaning adequate for objective criteria, but inside the subject in our mind, accessible directly with the will, or apparently directly, is a contradictory impossibility. You can't do that. You can have objects that are theories made of your subjective experiences, but they are not adequate objects from the objectivist's point of view. They'd just be called objects as a theoretical idea about material. For between two absolutely different spheres, as between subject and object, there is no causality, no correctness, and no expression. There is, at most, an aesthetic relation. I mean, a suggestive transference, a stammering translation into a completely foreign tongue, for which there is required, in any case, a freely inventive intermediate sphere and mediating force. Appearance is a word that contains many temptations, which is why I avoid it as much as possible, which I don't. For it is not true that the essence of things appears in the empirical world. A painter without hands who wishes to express in song the picture before his mind would, by means of this substitution of spheres, still reveal more about the essence of things than does the empirical world. Even the relationship of a nerve stimulus to the generated image is not a necessary one. But when the same image has been generated millions of times and has been handed down for many generations and finally appears on the same occasion every time for all mankind, then it acquires at last the same meaning for men it would have if it were the sole necessary image, and if the relationship of the original nerve stimulus to the generated image were a strictly causal one. In the same manner, an eternally repeated dream would certainly be felt and judged to be reality. Right, I've made this point before as well. If you were to, well, he'll go into this later, I'll just wait. But the hardening and congealing of a metaphor guarantees absolutely nothing concerning its necessity and exclusive justification. Every person who is familiar with such considerations has no doubt felt a deep mistrust of all idealism of this sort, just as often as he has quite early convinced himself of the eternal consistency, omnipresence, and fallibility of the laws of nature. He has concluded that so far as we can penetrate here, from the telescopic heights to the microscopic depths, everything is secure, complete, infinite, regular, and without any gaps. Science will be able to dig successfully in this shaft forever, and the things that are discovered will harmonize with and not contradict each other. How little does this resemble a product of the imagination, for if it were such, there should be some place where the illusion and reality can be divined. Against this, the following must be said. If each of us had a different kind of sense perception, if we could only perceive things now as a bird, now as a worm, now as a plant, or if one of us saw a stimulus as red, another as blue, while a third even heard the same stimulus as a sound, then no one would speak of such a regularity of nature. Rather, nature would be grasped only as a creation which is subjective in the highest degree. And he's just getting to how much we're dependent on our perceptions for our ideas of reality. After all, what is the law of nature as such for us? We are not acquainted with it in itself, but only with its effects, which means in its relation to other laws of nature, which in turn are known to us only as sums of relations. Therefore, all these relations always refer again to others, and are thoroughly incomprehensible to us in their essence. All that we actually know about these laws of nature is what we ourselves bring to them, time and space, and therefore relationships of succession and number. But everything marvelous about the laws of nature, everything that quite astonishes us therein and seems to demand explanation, everything that might lead us to distrust idealism, all this is completely and solely contained within the mathematical strictness and inviolability of our representations of time and space. But we produce these representations in and from ourselves with the same necessity with which the spider spins. If we are forced to comprehend all things only under these forms, then it ceases to be amazing that in all things we actually comprehend nothing but these forms. For they must all bear within themselves the laws of number. And it is precisely number which is the most astonishing in things. All that conformity to law which impresses us so much, aggrandizers, in the movement of the stars and in chemical processes, coincides at bottom with those properties which we bring to things. Thus it is we who impress ourselves in this way. In conjunction with this, it of course follows that the artistic process of metaphor formation, with which every sensation begins in us, already presupposes these forms and thus occurs within them. The only way in which the possibility of subsequently constructing a new conceptual edifice from metaphors themselves can be explained is by the firm persistence of these original forms. That is to say, this conceptual edifice is an imitation of temporal, spatial, and numerical relationships in the domain of metaphor. It's our model, in other words, and still is not the thing in itself.